I mix what I like, what I like.
Mix what I like is exactly where you want and need to be. I mix what I like organic, vegan, soul food from your immediate diet. Live healthy.
I mix what I like, what I like.
We're here on I Mix What I Like. You may check us out on imixwhatilike.org, where you can see all these other shows and what my daddy liked and other cool things.
Yes, indeed. Welcome, everybody, to I Mix What I Like live right here on Black Liberation Media. I'm Jared Ball, very happy to be your host. Happy 100th birthday, of course, to Malcolm X. Happy birthday to Yuri Kochiyama. Happy birthday to Ho Chi Minh. Happy birthday to, is it Lorraine Hansberry's birthday also? Do I have that? I think so, right? So happy birthday to her. Happy birthday to everybody else who I'm not remembering, and some who I may not even know. Salute to you if this is your birthday. And as they say, we're gonna party like it's your birthday. Big celebration, big shout out. We want to commemorate all of these folks and raise them up, and more importantly, maybe even than them, raise up a lot of the ideas with which they worked. So please don't be stingy. Like, share, subscribe, put this in your socials, invite others to join you. Let them know that it's on again and popping here on Black Liberation Media. And then after this show, we're going to take a quick break and come back again at 12 noon with a roundtable, a special roundtable featuring Kahindi Andrews talking about his new documentary, which is going to drop later today, and that we've talked a little bit about. And then who knows what else might happen. Please also, if you've missed any of it, the link is in the show description to the full 100 years. I created a playlist for it, so you can get the whole 100 years of Malcolm X playlist all in one place. If you missed anything, make use of the sources, the resources, and all of that other good stuff. And again, just unlike the mythology around the circulating black dollar, we can in reality circulate these ideas. All right. I think that's it. So without further ado, let's bring up our special guests and kick this thing off. Again, happy birthday to everybody. Like, share, subscribe. Put this in your social. Support the Patreon, blackliberationmedia.org, and all the new swag that you can get, all the new merch, and help the platform do all of that as well. So it was his idea that put this together.
You just don't read, beloved.
So we welcome Hiram Rivera back to the platform, and Dr. Orisanmi Burton, welcome to you as well. Author, of course, The Tip of the Spear. Everybody knows, we all know who it is, but I'll put all the links in the show description at some point, probably during this morning, to make sure you can follow up and get to all of their work. But fellas, welcome. Thank you for joining us this morning. Peace.
Peace. Free to land. Good morning.
Good morning.
So, look, Hiram, it was you started this whole thing. It was your idea, and you have a little bit of a time constraint this morning. So if we can, let me just invite you to offer up any first thoughts on Malcolm, the series, the day, the meaning of it, and then we can get to some of the resources that you all put together for us, and anything else. Yeah, welcome.
Yeah, first and foremost, Dr. Ball, want to say thank you for listening to my idea, bringing it to life. You were the one who brought it to life. You were the one who put all the work into this, and so huge shout out to you for this tremendous contribution that you have left us for years and years to come. The reason I came up with the idea and came to you with the idea was that Malcolm, I feel and have always felt, has been grossly under-researched, misunderstood a lot of times. The story kind of staying in this box of that redemption tale, right? Going from Detroit Red to like kind of like NOI, and just a lot of fiery speeches in between. But there was very little that actually dove into all of the lessons that Malcolm left us, all of the teachings that Malcolm gives us, and his influence that went well beyond anything any of the films or even some of the books have even captured, specifically around his ideological trajectory, right? And so when we're talking about a story of growth and redemption from someone who went from a hustler, part-time hustler and drug user and all that, into a fiery orator and revolutionary leader, so did his political trajectory, right? And its imprint, the imprint and the impact that it left not only in this country, but on the globe. And so feeling like at these 100 years, I felt there were so many lessons and so many things that could be pulled from Malcolm that hasn't been talked about. And if there was someone who can do it and who had the platform, the skill set, and the ability to make it plain, which is more Malcolm than anything, it was you. And so that's why I went to you and said, Dr. Ball, right, I've got this idea. Can you pull out some of these things? Because there's so much more we can learn from Malcolm that isn't being put out there, especially in these 100 years. Have you seen, I think you're the only one who actually took on the task of really trying to do something with this 100 years. Shout out to the People's Forum as well, but you were the only one who took Malcolm and for those 100 years really try to break something down. So thank you so much for that.
Nah, I mean, thank you and appreciate the kind words. But that's the point. I mean, it took, it's a collaborative effort, the idea had to be there. This platform had to be there. So yeah, no, it's great. It's an honor. Dr. Burton. So let me just give the full title: Tip of the Spear, Black Radicalism, Prison Repression, and the Long Attica Revolt. That I am happy to say because, Morgan State loves me so much, they can't help but throw more and more classes to me. They want me to engage as many students as humanly possible. And I've just been asked to teach a sociology of law class and a sociology of prisons class. Ooh. And each class will be, this is the text we are basing and starting with for each of those classes. So it's an honor. Thank you again for the great work and all the other work you're doing, and welcome. I did have a question. I did want to ask you if you wanted to say a word or two about how Malcolm figures in your work here, but anything you want to start with would be great.
I'm just affirming everything Hiram just said. Thanks, Hiram, for the idea. Jared, flawless execution. You know what I'm saying? It's been really dope. I've watched every single one that you've done, and it's been a joy. Some stuff I knew, some stuff I didn't. Your particular perspective around media has been really clarifying and fun to watch, and I think will be useful for other people in terms of thinking about how we think about Malcolm and why we think what we think about Malcolm. So I think that's extremely important. Malcolm's on the first page of Tip of the Spear, and he's not mentioned by name a lot, but he's on every page of Tip of the Spear. Because I actually want to make sure we give Hiram enough time to sort of get into it, but that's a really interesting question, and it connects to this Yuri Kochiyama joint that I just came back from. You see, I'm rocking because it's Yuri's birthday today too. She was 2 years older than Malcolm. So today's Malcolm's birthday, Yuri's birthday, Ho Chi Minh's birthday, Lorraine Hansberry's birthday. So May 19th is a revolutionary day. And so, yeah, I'm happy to talk a little bit more about that as we proceed. But definitely wanted to give Hiram an opportunity to ask any questions or share any of that thoughts. I mean, I'd love to hear about how you continue Malcolm's legacy through the work that you're doing and in the way that you're thinking. But I appreciate you bringing me into the conversation, Jared.
Man, please. It's an honor. This is great. But yeah, Hiram, do you want to talk a little bit about the work you're doing and how Malcolm figures, and I mean, you engage a lot of young folks in the work as well.
I've told the story before. I'm not gonna go into details, but my meeting Malcolm started when I got moved out of the city into a white suburb in Connecticut for high school, and just all of the drama that comes with that, the racism, the classism, it was just overwhelming. And in 1992, your favorite movie, Malcolm X, comes out, Jared, and my father takes my brother and I to go see it, and my world changed. My world changed. The movie wasn't perfect, but what it did was it offered this introduction that made me want to seek out more. And through Malcolm, I started to explore more of Black history. Through Malcolm, I started to explore Puerto Rican history and the movement overall, and it just stayed with me. And the number one lesson was, few lessons, right, was stay among the people. Malcolm came from the people. Malcolm never left the people, right? There are differences between, the leaders of his time, the civil rights leaders of his time, who focused primarily on desegregating the South and all that, but were never at home in the ghetto, were never in, right, those urban areas. And Malcolm never left. Malcolm never left Harlem. Malcolm never left the people. And also, Malcolm made it plain. And so took these very difficult ideas, these very difficult theories, and put it in the people's language, not watering it down, not dumbing it down, but just made it plain. And so those two things for me really, really stood out to me. So even his discipline and his study, right? His discipline to study, his willingness and openness to learn from everybody and anything that he could, but not just learn it for the sake of learning, but learning it so that it can be applicable to something, right? Malcolm didn't just read and just learn for the sake of having infinite knowledge and wisdom. He wanted to learn to be able to carry out a specific task. And so as I was growing up and I had my own dreams of one day becoming a professor and a PhD myself, the cards didn't play out for me in that way, but I still found a way in which I could still engage in that teaching and that learning from the people themselves. And I could still find a way to use those lessons, use that knowledge with the people, among the people themselves, right, in the work that I do, and find myself on this platform with PhD professors who I look up to, like you and Ori. And so for me, that has always been the lesson. Malcolm hangs on my wall every day, reminding me. And the whole goal is make it plain, stay among the people, and keep fighting the fight until the revolution is won.
Yeah, right on.
100%. And if I could just add, when I was doing the research for Tip of the Spear, I interviewed, dozens and dozens of people who were around in the 60s. All of them invariably cited Malcolm as their inspiration. So Malcolm is a genealogy. Do you know what I mean? Like it's a vast, deep, broad, global network of people who were shaped by him in different ways. So the three of us, of course, we never met him, and then it was people who did meet him, right? So that different level of proximity. But the thing you said about making it plain is just so important, because Malcolm's analysis was so sharp. But when I interviewed people who saw him giving those stump speeches on 135th and Lenox, they would say things like Eddie Ellis, who I talk about in the book. He said, he talked about how transformative Malcolm was, but one thing he said was he would speak these truths, and then he said, but they were really simple truths. They were kind of simple truths. And initially, I thought that was a little dismissive. Like, what do you mean simple? But it's true. He had this way of saying things that deep down people already knew, but saying it in a way that no one else could say it, and having the courage to say what other people were too scared to say. So that making it plain, it sounds simple, but it's a praxis, and it's a very radical praxis. And I think the other thing, people talk about Malcolm's charisma, which I think was real, but part of what that charisma was his ability to reflect back onto the people what they had inside them and their own desires and demands. So it wasn't an individual charisma of his specific sort of magic, which of course there was things that were very special about him, but his ability to reflect back onto the people and to voice the sort of desires and demands of the people was a part of his brilliance.
It's that like in the movie, being the clean glass of water. Jamel Gooch from Black National Assembly was here on the remix show a few weeks ago and talked about that. And I talk about it all the time. Be the clean glass of water, right? It's a story about the ink in the water, and you give the people the choice to choose, right? If they had a choice, they would choose that clean glass of water. Be that cool glass of water. Be that clean glass of water. Always is something that I take from Malcolm and that I try to apply all the time. And then also never being afraid to just speak up. Malcolm's words was his weapon. Malcolm's words, his voice was how he engaged in warfare. First, primarily because of his enrollment and his membership in the Nation of Islam, and didn't allow him to engage in any other type of struggle at that time. And so he had to use his words, but also because of, what Malcolm perceived to be one of the greatest consequences, injustices, crimes that white people committed on Black people was teaching them how to hate themselves and teaching us how to hate ourselves. And so that handkerchief head, somebody talks about that hat in hand, that head bobbing, that kind of like paralysis that Black people had at that time, many Black folks at that time, and even till today had in the face of white folks, in the face of white folks' words. Right? Malcolm wanted to push against that, was never afraid, be whatever the consequences may be, never afraid to say what needed to be said, say it to it had to be said, right? And to kind of like start shattering some of that awe and that mystique and that myth that even Comrade George talks about in Blood in My Eye, right? When he talks about what Yaki Sales also talks about when we're talking about the bourgeois state, right? And so you see Malcolm, to Ori's point, you see Malcolm and so many other different people in their willingness to say what needs to be said as fire as it needs to be said with no fear, in an attempt to shatter that mystique and that awe, right? That white folks had put themselves on. In that pedestal they put themselves on.
No, right on. Absolutely. So if it's all right, I wanted to try to summarize my own experience with this I think 13 weeks of this series, and then which will lead me to something that I want to ask you both about that based on what Ori sent us. So again, I want to, big thanks to everybody, to you, Hiram, for the whole process. This has been great, just selfishly revisiting Malcolm in a different way. I think it's important to it's a good reminder, like that my homeboy says, reading and studying are two different things. It's one thing to read something, it's one thing to actually study it. And then to come back and revisit something. This has just been great. And so there's just three sort of bullet points that I put together for what I've, what I want to continue to remind myself is and walk away, about Malcolm, because I think a lot of this I've fallen prey or fallen victim to the encouraged, to how we've been encouraged to study these histories. I think I've myself fallen prey to some of that, or victim to some of that. He was so Malcolm was actively raised up. All right, so yeah, these are the bullet points. So one is just around Black women, that he was raised up by Black women, politically, biologically, and that they raised him within a context of African world radicalism, brought him into advanced consciousness, and then at the end of his life, particularly through the OAAU, he was working to make corrective measures in terms of how Black women were treated within the movement and within his own organizational spaces, elevating them to leadership. So that's one thing. The other thing was, he was clear that the destiny of Black liberation here in the U.S. was intimately linked to those throughout Africa, Latin America, and specifically when it was appropriate to discuss, specifically with the struggles of Palestinian liberation, the struggle of Palestinian liberation. And then lastly, he was struggling to build the OAAU as the overt and unifying element of a much more broad and militant Black struggle here, and that he was clear that the Black liberation struggle in the United States was a national liberation struggle on par with all others. And I don't, that was one, aside from the issue of women, that was one point I don't think I've been even clear enough about. And then when Ori, you sent us Muhammad Ahmad's thesis, formerly Max Stanford's thesis, which I feel like I may have read in pieces here and there through his articles in the Black Scholar, maybe at some point, but I had never read. And then I put it in one of these text to speech apps. I've been listening to it, particularly all morning. And as I was telling Hiram beforehand, I have definitely not studied Ram enough. I have definitely not studied the specifics around what Malcolm wanted the OAAU to be in relationship to Ram and these more militant efforts. So I was, because you sent the document, and then Hiram, I know you know the man well for a long time. I definitely, before you had to take off, Hiram, wanted to start this, but I pick up with that last point that I raised, this issue of Black America being a national liberation struggle in the eyes of Malcolm X, and what that meant for him in terms of his building with Ram in particular, but all kinds of not only was he inspirational to all these movements and movements afterwards, but in his lifetime, he was trying to build with these more militant wings of the struggle that in ways that I don't think certainly I've given enough attention to, and we're not encouraged to at all. So Hiram, let me start with you, and then yeah.
Yeah, so I've definitely had the privilege and the honor of knowing Dr. Ahmed very well, and had the ability to meet up with him from time to time, and hear from the brother himself, and all the stories that obviously cannot be told here on YouTube are absolutely fascinating and mind-boggling, and just shows we know maybe about 10 to 20% of what was actually happening at that time period, right? Especially with a criminally understood and researched organization like the Revolutionary Action Movement. And so I think, what I've learned is from Dr. Ahmed himself and from reading is that, yeah, Malcolm never had a desire to be American. Malcolm never had those necessities, because, as Malcolm put it, America never cared about him. So he never cared and desired to be an American. Malcolm's internationalism first comes by way of his mother, Louise Little, right? And his parents, who were Garveyites, but his mom being Grenadian. And so the little children reading internationalist West Indian newspapers as children, right? Already developing their internationalist worldview by the time, before even Malcolm gets out of elementary school. By the time he gets to the Nation of Islam and following the teachings of the messenger, right? You start to, again, starts to build on that and adapt, right? As the Nation of Islam took on this position of what later became the Black Belt thesis, the independent states, right, in the South, that Black people can never find their salvation in the wilderness of North America, right? And the goal is out of this forest, both mentally, right, but also physically. And so it builds upon that. And then Malcolm starts with his break with the Nation of Islam, then starts to travel around the globe and is meeting different people, specifically folks like Pio Pinto Gama, the journalist and revolutionary thinker in Kenya, who was deeply supportive of the Mau Maus, right? And was also a Marxist Pan-Africanist who started teaching Malcolm his Pan-Africanism. So in between that, when you start adding the Queen Mother Moors, and Jared just showed about the women who made Malcolm and helped make Malcolm, was, brilliant. The Queen Mother Moore, Eloise, right, her sister Eloise Moore, Vicky Garvin, these folks who are connected to the global Black struggle, but also the struggles that are the global struggle at the time. It's Vietnam, it's China, it's Cuba, it's Guinea-Bissau, it's Angola. It is, you're in a moment of revolution, the Bandung Conference, that when you take all of those things together, then it becomes pretty easy to see how Malcolm always saw Black people as a part of an international anti-colonial struggle, not as an American struggle, right, but as a global struggle of Black people, right? The original man, the original woman, which includes Asia, Africa, Latin America, if you're following the teachings of the messenger and the NOI and all of that, right? And so what is really enlightening for me is that and this, when I approached you, Jerry, if you remember, one of the first shows I talked about was this relationship between Malcolm and Elijah. While the NOI definitely cleaned up Malcolm to an extent and gave him a platform, it didn't completely make him, right? Malcolm was already this internationalist thinker coming into the NOI. The NOI absolutely gave him skills, absolutely gave him a position where he can use that, right? And the show, the analogy, what I was saying was, it is the messenger and the message. Elijah, right, and his Nation of Islam had a thesis, had a theory, had an understanding of where the lost tribe of Shabazz, the black folks in this country, the New Africans, fit in this global stage. And it was Malcolm who delivered that message on behalf of the messenger, right? And it's the message that we understand. And so going back, it is the story of Moses and Aaron, right? Where Moses comes down from the mountaintop with the 10 commandments, and it is his brother Aaron who is out proselytizing, right? And teaching the commandments to the people. And just like the story of Moses and Aaron, Aaron eventually is struck down because of, right, his betrayal of the commandments of the God, and is kept out of the promised land and dies in the wilderness, right? And you can bring all this back to Malcolm and, again, the wilderness of North America and that whole story. We're not going to go down that road. But ultimately, what we want to see is that Malcolm already had this understanding. And with the break of the Nation of Islam and meeting the folks in Africa, Malcolm understood very clearly that there's only one way out. Comrade George talks about this in Blood in My Eye as well. The United States is not going to give up its power. The United States is never going to see black people as being worth anything. And there's only one way out of this Babylon, right? And it's the same way that we came in, through guns and violence. And so as Africa is revolting and is uniting, is attempting to build this Pan-African dream of a united continent under scientific socialism, then Malcolm is also, right, playing his part. Because the beauty of Malcolm is that not only was Malcolm an organizer, Malcolm was willing to be organized, right? There's a level of selflessness, right, that is unheard of in today's sphere. And you could name your favorite revolutionary now, your favorite organizer now. They right, the level of selflessness that Malcolm held can't be matched. And so allow yourself, as the message, as the person who's seen as the one who delivered the messenger's message, who was delivering the message to black people to take us out of this Babylon, right, to be organized himself, speaks volumes of who Malcolm was. And so as this is happening in Africa, we understand that it is Robert F. Williams in Cuba and China. It is Dr. Ahmed who's traveling around the United States talking to Ella Baker. It is James and Grace Lee Boggs. There is an organizing that is happening here in the United States to coalesce all of these revolutionary forces into what Malcolm was referring to as the Mau Maus here, right? And organizing that. And unfortunately, his vision, not only his vision, right, but the vision that he was a part of and the vision that he was helping grow and build didn't come to fruition because of that fateful afternoon in the Audubon Ballroom. But we see, again, that trajectory of Malcolm's revolutionary thought when it goes from a purely nationalist revolution under the Nation of Islam, right, and then broadens out into this revolutionary, right, that adds this class character to it. So his last speech in Detroit, not the actual last speech, but one of his last speeches in Detroit, Malcolm's again speaking very plain. And I'll wrap up with this. If you listen to Malcolm's speeches towards the end and you have read Marx before, you hear the Marxism in what Malcolm is saying, but he doesn't have to rely on Marx's rhetoric or jargon to do it. And so when Malcolm is making these things very plain, and it makes it sound very obvious because it is obvious to you, right? Then you can spot the politics in there. He knew what he was doing and who he was talking to. He's always very clear about who he was talking to and why he was talking to them in particular, right? The poor black masses, the potential detonators of revolution in this country. And so when he's sitting in there in Detroit and he's talking after they blew up his home, and he's talking about there is a global system at play. It's not just the white devil. There's a global system at play, among which, within which it has this imperialism, it's colonialism, it's militarism, right, that needs to be eradicated and destroyed. Then you're starting to see the class consciousness and the marks inside of Malcolm that was already existing in Queen Mother Moore, Vicky Garvin, Dr. Muhammad Ahmed, Robert F. Williams, and so on and so on. But Malcolm was the one, as the message, right, the deliverer of the message, who was able to put it in words that the people understood, the people cared about, they felt comfortable with, and they felt agitated and moved by. Till this day, 100 years later, there's still no Black leader, I would say globally, that moves people, right? The way that Brother Malcolm does.
Now listen.
All of that. Hey, while we have this quick pause or this short pause, please everybody like, share, subscribe, put this in your socials, support the Patreon, new store, new merch available. I saw Kamau in the chat, so I'm always reminded to put the plate out when that happens. So please do. blackliberationmedia.org. Website's been revamped, store been revamped. Salute to Renee and the crew for all of that work. And I got a truckload of merch on the way now. So a whole new wardrobe. So, but no, thank you for all that, Hiram. That's right on. Ori, let me, please add on.
No, the question of Ram is critical, and people need to understand Akbar Muhammad Ahmad. So Akbar is the title that he was referred to in the 60s. My father was mentored by Akbar, and so that's the phrase that's the term. So whenever my dad talks about Dr. Ahmad, so you could call him Dr. Ahmad, you could call him Baba Ahmad, you could call him Akbar Muhammad Ahmad. These are all titles of respect. He's still alive. This person is, I mean, he wouldn't want to be referred to, perhaps, or he wouldn't refer to himself this way, but he's a living legend. I don't know if it was me or Hiram who started calling him the Forrest Gump of the Black liberation struggle, but I think that's an apt term in terms of the man was everywhere. The man was an organizer. He was always on the road. He was involved with anyone and everyone who was organizing in a serious and disciplined way for Black liberation. I think, it's Muhammad Ahmad and, Yuri Kochiyama, and I'm sure many others, in terms of the people who took it upon themselves, and I'm going to talk more about Yuri later, to actively carry on and preserve Malcolm's legacy and to defend it against what they knew would be attempts to dilute, co-opt, water it down. So much of what we know about Malcolm, we know because of what Akbar has done, because of what Yuri has done to preserve and carry on that legacy, right? And so RAM is a critical part of this. It was established in 1962 at Central State University in Ohio and HBCU in Ohio, and it evolved over time. But the idea, which according to Akbar, the idea was that it would be a clandestine Marxist-Leninist Black revolutionary movement that would infiltrate the civil rights movement and push it left from within. So RAM was in SNCC. The first, RAM was in CORE. RAM was at the Mississippi Freedom Democratic, Party, that formation. They were key to that formation. And the failure of that formation to actually, win political power within the sort of, the established democratic process contributed to them adopting, a more militant strategy. The first formation of the Black Panther Party was actually a revolutionary action movement formation that was established in Harlem 2 months before Bobby Seale and Huey P. Newton established the Black Panther Party for Self-Defense in Oakland. The Revolutionary Action Movement established the Harlem Black Panther Party, and that happened in Yuri Kochiyama's apartment. She lived in the Manhattanville projects on 126 and Broadway, and that's where they would meet. So it would be Muhammad Ahmad, who had recently returned from the South, organizing with the Lowndes County Freedom Organization. There was a contingent from Harlem that went down to organize with Kwame Ture. And of course, we know that their emblem was the Black Panther to try to win political power in this majority Black area of Alabama. And so Muhammad Ahmad and others took the Black Panther idea back to Harlem with permission from Stokely Carmichael. They met in Yuri Kochiyama's apartment multiple times. It was Akbar Muhammad, Eddie Ellis, who's in my book, Larry Neal, the Black Arts Movement poet, was original founding member of the Harlem Black Panther Party. Queen Mother Moore was there. Yuri was there. Sam Anderson was there. All right. And then the movement kind of spread. So Ram was central to the formation of the Black Panther Party. The revitalization of COINTELPRO in 1967, which you know, COINTELPRO started in 1956 to destabilize the Communist Party. By 1968, the Black Panther Party is considered the greatest threat to national security. But in 1967, when COINTELPRO was reestablished, they were primarily concerned with RAM. The state, and so this is why Akbar talks about how the idea of the clandestine apparatus was not executed successfully, because if it was, RAM wouldn't have been targeted. Right. So RAM is the only organization that Malcolm X ever joined, to Hiram's point, outside of the NOI, right? He established the OAAU, he established Muslim Mosque Incorporated, but he joined RAM. And the reason why we don't know a whole lot about it is because a collective decision was made to keep his membership on the low, because RAM was already sort of on the radar. And you understand, you know, from what you read in terms of the thinking about OAAU being a front for, you know, the idea was to keep it low key, right? And so, you know, I don't often talk about this aspect of Ram and Malcolm also, because I think they're, you know, there's some utility in not highlighting it as much, but I think that the time has come. It's 100 years of Malcolm. You know, we need to talk about this. We need to elevate it.
So this becomes almost a parallel of sorts to what I remember reading or listening to, I should say, specifically in the thesis about the differences between Ram and Huey and the Panthers, between overt armed struggle, covert, and to the point that please
go ahead. Please.
I only wanted to
want
say
Hiram to be able to talk before he's got to go.
I only wanted to say that to the point that was some of the point that was raised about criticism and self-criticism, even some in the chat. It's fascinating to read in his own thesis, Baba Ahmed's willingness to be self-critical of RAM and their own efforts, and reconsider something. I mean, it's just so anyway. But yeah, Hiram, sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just flowing and listening. I think the impact of Maoism as well, right? So RAM and the Marxist-Leninist Maoists, right, and the emphasis on mass line, going among the people, the peasant revolts. This criticism, self-criticism, comes from those Maoist teachings, and Robert F. Williams. You know, what was being built at that time, and again, when you sit with the elders and you speak with them and you hear like all the stuff that they were facing, really puts a lot of things in perspective. And again, for me, put Malcolm in a different perspective for me ideologically. And I saw a debate in the chat or whatever. It doesn't dismiss the role that his faith played, right? I think Islam absolutely saved Malcolm. Islam absolutely grounded Malcolm. Islam, you know, allowed Malcolm to have a certain level of clarity and understanding. Islam didn't grow his ideology, but it gave him a foundation upon which he could lean on. I say this because I was riding the bus with Dr. Ahmed one day. We're in Philadelphia, coming from an event, and he goes to me, he goes, Ak, what do you believe in? And I'm like, what do you mean, Doc? I call him Doc, right? I'm like, what do you mean? Like, he's like, you gotta believe in something. I was like, oh, I'm an atheist, Doc. I don't believe in. He's like, you need something. When the times get hard, and times are gonna get hard, right? You got to lean on something. He like, you need to believe in something. And so for him, it was through Malcolm that he also found Islam. It was through Malcolm that Sekou Dinga found Islam. Islam didn't give them the politic, but Islam gave them that grounding and that foundation, that faith. So when the times got hard, there was something they could lean on and they wouldn't break, because the times for them got very, very hard and they wouldn't break. And Malcolm understood, right, the balance. While he made the comment about putting your religion in the closet, I think for him, it was, again, more sort of allegorical stuff, right? Because the Nation of Islam speaks in allegory. It speaks in code, which Malcolm also learned, which is what I'm talking about. The Marxism, that you will not hear blatant Marxism come out of Malcolm's mouth, because everything is spoken in code and through parable, right? The Nation of Islam gives its orders through parable, and the interpretation of those psalms, the interpretation of those passages are what then dictates their moves at that time, right? And so I think for Malcolm, the role of Islam was absolutely some grounding, but he moved from a place of believing while he was in the Nation of Islam that I'm going to speak. And this was a critique of Stokely Carmichael, right? When they asked about Malcolm to Stokely Carmichael at the time, right? But at the time, Stokely and Snick, he was like, Malcolm, he said, Malcolm doesn't do nothing. I don't think about Malcolm because Malcolm doesn't do nothing, right? Like, what is Malcolm doing? He's just saying words. Malcolm doesn't do nothing. At that time, Malcolm was waiting for Allah to fight the war for him, right? We, as someone who has been through NOI teachings when I was a kid, and then later became a 5%er, right? It was the belief that Allah will take care. Allah will rid us for the 6,000-year curse, right? Yaqub's 6,000-year curse and the devil. And you're waiting for Allah to do that and the mother plane to appear and all of those things. At some point, he put that to the side and took on the responsibility himself and started teaching us that we had a responsibility ourselves to escape this Babylon, right? And free ourselves out of this Babylon. And so it's not to say that Islam does not play a role in Malcolm's life or his trajectory, or even the lives of those he inspired, who also then took their shahadas, right? And became Muslims themselves. But it was not Islam that ultimately pushed him ideologically, right? It just gave him that foundation when the times got hard, where he could lean on and he wouldn't break because he felt held, and allowed him to continue his trajectory in the path that he had to go on to be the leader that he was, not just for us here in this country, but for the world 100 years later. You can.
I agree. I agree with what you said, Hiram. I think so. One, Akbar talks about how members of RAM essentially nurtured his move left. That includes Queen Mother Moore, right? So yeah. So while he's in the nation, there are people inside the nation, actually, according to Akbar, and members of RAM who are adjacent to the nation, who are working to push him ideologically left, right? So that's one piece. And so I agree with what you said. The other piece, though, is that, and I'm not an expert on Islam, but of course, you know, his relationship to Islam changes, and the genealogy of Islam that he begins to practice changes, right? And so in the genealogy that he adopts, right, there are, you know, parts of the Quran that enjoin people to struggle against injustice. So it's Malcolm adopts the genealogy of Islam that many who, and you mentioned this, right? Many who later, you know, form the BLA adopt, right? So Daruba talks about how, you know, when he took his Shahada, you know, part of what he received once he adopted Islam was the understanding that what he was doing in the Panthers and in the BLA was totally in line with his understanding of Islam in terms of being enjoined to always resist against oppression, and as he would say it, defend the underdog, right? And so there is a revolutionary content to the form of Islam that they embrace, right? So it's not. So I agree that it provides something to lean on in hard times, but it also offers an active revolutionary a revolutionary thrust that he was also drawing on. And later, I think probably after you go, there's a quote from one of the books where he's talking about Marxism and Islam. And I think, you know, we got to do a little reading between the lines, but he was developing a kind of a synthesis, a new synthesis for Black Muslim radicals in the US and in the diaspora. And he never got a chance to fully articulate what that looked like. So that's what we're doing here, is kind of trying to flesh that out.
Yeah, no doubt. Thank you both, of course, for that. Folks, please do like, share, subscribe, support the Patreon, blackliberationmedia.org, new store. All links are in the show description. And Kamal's asking why Hiram has to leave, because he's got too much work to do.
Yeah,
So,
I gotta catch a flight to Chicago. So,
speaking of all that, I have to say that not only I appreciate all that you've said there. I've said for years, if I used to try to come up with a joke about, if you're going to be a Muslim, be like Malcolm. If you're going to be a Christian, be like Nat Turner. Had a whole little, I forgot all the rest of them. I used to have a whole list, but I will say, Daruba's sentencing story is probably the biggest threat to my atheism that I've ever been exposed to. The whole story around his being encouraged to certain forms of prayer and practice, and then the way that whole the judge froze up and it said you can go, it's just wild. So yeah. But absolutely appreciate revolutionary approaches to.
One thing I would add that Dr. Ahmed told me why he joined, or he took his shahada, was because of the discipline.
Mm-hmm.
And he said they were looking for discipline, right? And the discipline that Islam gave them structure to their lives, gave them structure and focus that then allowed them to be able to play the roles, right, that they had to play, and to stay on task, and to keep with the struggle. So it was a discipline that Islam provided them, right, that they were seeking, especially these brothers engaged in these types of actions, those brothers who were coming out of prison, who were looking for structure, who were looking for discipline, right, to stay on task with what they were doing. They felt that it was Islam that provided them that.
And so, just to be clear, folks might already know, I think it was 1973, in the Tombs, the Manhattan House of Detention, Akbar Muhammad, H. Rap Brown, who would soon, change his name to Imam Jamil Al-Amin, and Anthony Bottom, who would soon change his name to Jalil Muntakim, were all incarcerated in the Tombs in 1973 in solitary confinement, but next to each other. And they had intense conversations about revolution and Islam. And that was the moment that Jalil Muntakim talks about as the transformative moment, when he, made the commitment to adopt Islam as his, not only his spiritual modality, but, part of his political and his revolutionary modality. Right. So I just want to point that out. And we can talk more about this, but the state, then this is actually the beginning of the war on terror in the US, because of the amount of Black revolutionary Muslims in prison. There's a whole discourse that emerges around, de-radicalization of Black Muslims in prisons that precedes 9/11 by several decades. And so 9/11 is the post 9/11 national security state is an intensification of the counterinsurgency that was waged against Black Muslim prisoners like Akbar, like Imam Jamil Al-Amin, like Daruba and Jalil and the rest of them. So, and I have a document that we can look at that connects all of that to Malcolm X. So we can look at that.
Oh, beautiful. And no, it is wild to reconsider, the 70s and 80s media that I grew up watching, where so much of the anti-Arab depictions and anti-Muslim depictions in media had some foundations in the Black liberation struggle as well, is crazy. Hiram, it's something maybe to give you something to vamp on. No, go ahead.
Real quick, I was just going to say a quick story. In 1954, when the Puerto Rican nationalists shot up the House of Representatives, claiming of free Puerto Rico, they were sentenced to prisons across the country. Rafael Cancel Miranda was sent to Alcatraz. And he told me the story. He would tell us these stories, and he was purposely put in the Black section of the prison. Rafael Cancel Miranda was a tall, white-skinned, light-eyed Puerto Rican. and he got purposely put in the black section of the prison. It's about 1955, because what the prison guards and what the state wanted was obviously, right, for them to kill him in there, seeing him as a white man. Not only were they black, right, but they were black Muslim. So the whole white devil thing, they were like, we can get rid of, to your point, Ori, these terrorists, these things, we can just get rid of them, right, inside of the pen. He says when he gets in there, they ask him, they put him in there, the word gets put out, nobody touches this man. He's kind of like, why? He said it was the Nation of Islam that protected him. The Nation of Islam who knew who he was, what the fight was, right? And again, the teachings of the messenger and all that, the universal family and all those things were like, nobody touches this man. If anything, this is the safest place in the entire prison that he could be, because not the guards, not other prisoners, nobody else is touching this man for as long as he's housed here in Alcatraz. And he always had a special place for the Nation of Islam in his heart because of that.
That's what's up. Listen, one thing I wanted to just throw up before, so you can just to form some concluding thoughts for you around, and again, big thanks to you again for all of this and for coming through this morning. In Dr. Ahmad's thesis, he says, if I caught it right, because again I was listening to it and I tried to write it down as soon as I heard it, but he says two things that I about Malcolm that I thought were interesting, and I don't know that I've ever heard them put this way or quite this way. One in particular was that he said that Malcolm was, I believe he said, the first black revolutionary nationalist to articulate the point at all, or on a global stage, or in any I guess demonstrable or meaningful way. So I thought that was interesting. He also says that he was definitively on his way to becoming a revolutionary socialist as well. And so I just thought I would, put that in the air for you to form some thoughts, or your concluding thoughts about as you wrap up for today, and then obviously anything else you want to drop on us before you leave. But I thought those 2 points were pretty interesting.
Yeah. I think there is Malcolm's imprint on me. Malcolm's inspiration on me is I can't put it into words, right? What it means and what that's done. I don't want to go as far as like Malcolm made me, but man, he sure as hell came super close to making me at 15 years old, right? I still have the poster I bought as 15 years old. I still have that poster framed in my apartment, because that was, he was it and continues to be it to this day. What it reminds me of when I think of Malcolm, when I try to be like Malcolm, is always be the clean glass of water again. Right? For starving people, thirsty people, when all they have is that glass of water with ink in it, they're going to drink whatever you give them. But if you can provide them the option and be that cool, clean glass of water, the people are always going to choose the clean glass of water. Be that clean glass of water. The other lesson for me is always from Malcolm is to study, but study with a purpose. Study to do something, not just to accumulate a bunch of knowledge for the sake of it, but to do something with that. And it reminds me of this piece by Nadezhda Krupskaya, who was Lenin's partner, and it's titled "How Lenin Studied Marx," right, by Krupskaya. It talks about, in order to understand Marx, that Lenin then had to read who Marx read to understand how Marx got to where he got. George does this as well with his 99 books, right? If you read this, you said you got this from idea, I need to go read that person to understand that idea, to better understand you. Malcolm read everything, known for reading everything, but it was with a purpose. And so if Malcolm is saying that I'm speaking to Sekou Touré, that I'm learning from Nkrumah, that I'm learning from these folks, right, then research and study who are those people who helped make Malcolm, right? Who is Queen Mother Moore? Who is Vicky Garvin, right? Eloise Moore? Who is Robert F. Williams? Who is Dr. Ahmed? Who is Ram? Go back and study the people that your favorites studied so that you can better understand who your favorites are and fully get their concept. Because what we end up having is a misapplication, misinterpretation, misunderstanding of the politics of our favorites. And so we put their names on t-shirts and be like, Assata taught me. And you like, Assata taught you what? How to write a grant? Assata ain't teach you shit. Right? And that's not nothing to the Assata taught me, folks, because it's done with everybody in every culture, every revolutionary hero. And Lenin talks about this in State and Revolution, right, where they take your revolutionary heroes and misinterpret them on purpose to sell them back to you to misdirect your revolution. And so what I would say from Malcolm is study with the purpose. Go back and read who your favorites read. Be among the people. Live among the people. Speak among the people. Learn the language they speak in, and then take your politic and put it in their language. And together, right, you will get to the point. And lastly, the importance of that I get from Dr. Ahmed is, man, just shut up, be quiet. You don't have to be out there. You don't have to have all the lights on you and all the eyes on you. You don't have to be shouting the loudest. Everyone doesn't need to know your name. Everyone doesn't need to see your face. In order to get the work done, sometimes you got to move in silence. Most of the times you got to move in silence. Dr. Ahmed, when we're talking, one of his, he has some regrets, and some of his regrets are out being too public in certain places and times that then didn't allow for the building of what it was that they were trying to build, right? And he's always on me. You don't need to be here. You don't need to do all these things, right? Because you got to move under the radar because they're always watching, and the state plays this game to win. And so those are things that I would say: a level of humility, selflessness, right? He is and forever will be our black shining prince who didn't hesitate to die because he loved us so, right? And so I take that with me. I try to live that as much as I can, and I am forever grateful for our Omawale El Haj Malik Al-Shabazz, our brother minister, right, Malcolm X.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Thank you, man.
Thank you so very much, Dr. Ahmed. Thank you, Dr. Burton. Thank you all in the chat, and I'll catch you in the whirlwind.
Thank you very much, man. Safe travels, man. Be safe. Right. Peace, man.
Right.
Peace.
You just don't read, beloved.
Hey, we got it live and direct. Dr. Burton, with your permission, I need a quick break, but I thought to do that, I would play as a sort of commercial, a clip from the, I believe it was for WBAI, but we got it through Facebook, this discussion that involves the granddaughter of Yuri Kuchiyama, Akemi. Akemi, sorry, forgive me. And if I could, I wanted to pull up a clip where she's being asked, where she's answering the question of who was Yuri Kuchiyama. Perfect. And then we can come back in the second half of the show. Please, everybody, big thanks to Hiram. Big thanks again to Dr. Burton for joining us. Big thanks to you as well. Please do all the things, like, share, subscribe, and we will be back in just a moment. Again, this is Bill Sales with Basir Mchawi, and a discussion in this segment about Yuri Kuchiyama and her relationship to Malcolm and radical politics. Back in just a minute.
See state power in the country of our birth. And so we have to go to Malcolm again to learn the lessons that we need to learn to fight these people under 21st century conditions.
Mm-hmm. Akemi, I want to put you on the spot by asking you, who is Yuri Kuchiyama? Because there may be some people who don't know anything about your grandmother. So let us kind of know, let them know, and then we'll connect her to Brother Malcolm.
Sure. So Yuri Kochiyama was my grandma, and she was a second generation Japanese American citizen born and raised in Southern California. She was born in 1921, so a few years before Malcolm. Grew up very American, Christian, patriotic. Her father was a successful businessman, a merchant fisherman in a Japanese American, a very mixed, actually, immigrant community in San Pedro, California. And then when after the bomb was dropped on Pearl Harbor in the beginning of World War II, everything changed that day. Her father was immediately apprehended and by the FBI, and it was clear that he had been under surveillance for some time, and he was charged with being a spy and then incarcerated and treated as such. The next time she saw him was a couple of weeks later when they dropped him off um, at his home, and he died the next day. Her immediate experience of World War II beginning was losing her father under state sanctioned violence under the state, under the state, which was just a shocking experience as a very sort of patriotic Christian American, just living her life. So she was 18 when that happened. And her family, a couple weeks later, her family was incarcerated and eventually ended up in a concentration center in Jerome, Arkansas, for the remainder of the war. While that experience didn't immediately politicize her, the experience of losing the rights of citizenship immediately, and then during the war, she had the opportunity to travel to Hattiesburg, Mississippi, to participate in an all Japanese American USO, as Japanese American soldiers were joining the army and shipping off and deploying off to Europe to fight for the United States. My grandmother during the war went to Hattiesburg, Mississippi, and for the first time in her life saw Jim Crow, which she had never seen, growing up in California. So again, while the experience of World War II didn't immediately politicize her, she didn't really connect the dots. She started to understand that there was a history of people who are not white living in America experiencing incredible levels of prejudice and discrimination and violence, which she had been, before that sort of unaware of completely. So, those experiences at a young age, she's 18 when the bomb is dropped on Pearl Harbor, and her father is essentially interrogated to death by the United States. She comes while she was in Hattiesburg, she meets my grandfather, Bill Kochiyama, who was actually a native New Yorker, born and raised in Harlem. He actually grew up on 126th Street, between Amsterdam and Broadway and the Sheltering Arms. And so he, at 18, being from New York City and then incarcerated, joined the 442, which was the all Japanese American segregated troops that fought very valiantly during World War II. Like most of the people who joined those troops, my grandfather was really trying to prove his loyalty, to the United States. And he was, American guy from Harlem, and he ends up, in camp, and he gets this opportunity to join the war. So he ends up in Hattiesburg, Mississippi, also in a segregated, so a lot of people don't know, Camp Shelby in Hattiesburg, Mississippi, was the site of the training for Black and Japanese soldiers training to deploy to Europe during World War II. So they had a Black USO and a Japanese USO there. And so that's how my grandparents met. So just the context in which they met, during the war, I think for both of them was a really sort of the spark in the beginning of this experience of understanding that there's a history that they didn't understand about the United States, and I'd say that's really important. So coming out of the war, my grandfather, like many Black and Japanese American soldiers, did not get all the benefits of the GI Bill as they had anticipated. So my family thought they were going to end up, I think during the war, if you read my grandparents' love letters, they very much anticipated moving into, middle-class housing in Long Island with, a low interest mortgage from, the United States government. They didn't get those things, just like Black soldiers, and they ended up in public housing in New York City. And that experience, immediately after the war, they ended up moving to Harlem in 1960 with their 6 children, and enrolling their children in public school there. And they got involved in the Harlem Parents Committee, which was really just fighting for basic rights, safer, cleaner, better quality public schools for their kids. And so that's how they initially got involved in community stuff. They were both living in the Manhattanville projects, but also joined the Harlem Parents Committee. That led to them learning about the Harlem, all the freedom schools that were emerging. And they enrolled themselves in those freedom schools and their children so that they could try to understand and learn more about history. It's in that context in 1963 that Uri starts to see Malcolm on the streets of Harlem, talking. And, just like, she said there were so many different kinds of Black leaders and organizations out there speaking. And it was then that she got the opportunity to meet him. And I think she would say meeting him really changed her perspective from being like a sort of pro-integration civil rights activist to as sort of a radical anti-imperialist and a Black nationalist. And it really changed her perspective. And to the point about what we're talking about history and also the efforts to erase Malcolm, but also history in general about our histories. She'd say the most important thing she learned from Malcolm was how important it was to understand and know your own history and study history, but also to know other people's history. Malcolm was a great scholar of history, and she learned that from him. And he knew all about the history of Asia, and this is why he had such a broad and deep understanding of imperialism and how that was impacting all kinds, people of color all over the world. So I think that really, changed her consciousness and radicalized her, and she dedicated the rest of her life to both educating herself, about history and about other people's history, and constantly trying to learn and meet other people, but really to just keep Malcolm's, story and spirit alive. And she dedicated, the rest of her life to just doing everything to make sure that people knew who Malcolm was. So, I spent most of my childhood this time of year in May, it's going to every Malcolm thing that could happen in Harlem. And then I can't count how many times I've been to the pilgrimage. And Yuri went faithfully to the pilgrimage every single year, that she was alive, from his passing until she moved to California in 1999. So I'd say, that's her that's a sort of snapshot of her journey from like Japanese American, provincial girl to a radical anti-imperialist.
Absolutely. So I'm going to Ori, thanks for sharing that with me, and I'll make sure the link is in the show description, because the whole discussion is fascinating, and I admit I haven't heard from Bill Sales in too long either. So salute to WBAI, salute to Pacifica, salute to all the radical uses of unsanctioned and unsupported, unpopular in the conventional sense media, for keeping these stories and histories alive. And I'm not familiar with. Now I don't want to mess it up again. Akemi.
Akemi, yeah.
Akemi. So forgive me for that too. I'm woefully ignorant about her, and insufficiently aware of the story of her grandmother. So that was fantastic. And again, I'll put the link in the show description so people get the whole thing. Did you have any initial thoughts about any of that before we move on to what I know you wanted to bring us to?
Oh, I mean, it's all connected. Well, first of all, folks should be familiar with Education at the Crossroads. That's Basir's show. It comes on WBAI. I've been on there several times, but he's a movement person. He was part of the East.
Oh,
which
wow.
was a political organization in Brooklyn. He's a journalist. He did a lot of work to keep Malcolm's legacy alive. He was, he and my father are tight. Basir is my godfather. I mean, this is the thing that gets into, like the family stuff, right? So Akemi is Yuri's granddaughter. Akemi's mother has passed away. Her name was Aichi. Aichi was married to Akamal Duncan. Akamal Duncan, his slave name was Sheldon Duncan, but he received the name Akamal from Malcolm X, who named him when he was 10 years old, who, he approached Malcolm and said, he told Malcolm, I want a struggle name. And Malcolm looked at him and looked into him and said that you're an extremely strong person. So I'm going to name you Al-Kamal, the camel, which is the strongest animal in the desert. And Al-Kamal took that name on and became an organizer with RAM, with the Harlem Black Panther Party, with organizing students, and became a mentee and a very close comrade of Yuri. And eventually married Yuri's daughter, Aichi. Akamal and Aichi were also my godparents, and Akamal named my father, who was named John, who took the name Akram, and Akram named me. So I grew up, you know, I grew up being, you know, sort of like, I grew up in that legacy, in that lineage very clearly. So Akemi is family. And Yuri, you know, Akemi's story starts to talk about Yuri's transformation. And like Malcolm, it's a transformation that continues. And she met Malcolm in 63, and that sort of really radicalized her. She introduced Malcolm to some of the survivors of the Hiroshima bombing and invited Malcolm to her apartment. And he came, and they had a very dynamic conversation. And she talks about Malcolm's humility a lot, and the fact that he had no reason to really take her seriously because she hadn't, made as many contributions to the movement at that point. But she talks about how much he listened and learned from the people there, how much he had to share with them. He impressed them with his knowledge of the history of imperialism in Asia and the anti-colonial struggle. She talks about how he was taking a firm stance against the war in Vietnam in 1964, which precedes the sort of anti-war movement, right? So he was against the Vietnam War before it was cool. And that was a principled stance around, having a grounding in anti-colonialism. Eventually she becomes very involved in RAM. She too was someone who was very humble. She really epitomizes the kind of person who doesn't need to be in the forefront. And this is part of why more people don't know who she was. But she was extremely important to RAM. She was extremely important to the formation of the Black Panther Party. She becomes a citizen of the Republic of New Africa. She studies at the OAAU's Freedom School, and there's a section of her biography where she talks about all of those lessons that, if we do have time, we could look at, because that's fascinating to think about, what the OAAU did actually achieve in terms of its political education projects and the impact that had. And like I said, so a couple other things about Yuri. Her apartment is legendary. I just came from a conference about Yuri where it was amazing. Like I can't even articulate how transformative it was. How many different kinds of people were there. Yuri really epitomizes radical solidarity, right? I mean, she brought all these different people together. She had her apartment was a meeting space. Everyone who was involved in the movement was invited to her house. She would have people sleeping there. She would hold meetings there. They would strategize there. She dutifully and meticulously collected archives about the movement. She produced flyers. She helped co-found the National Committee for the Defense of Political Prisoners with Safia Bukhari and others, and was, the primary support person for political prisoners, not just Black, but also Puerto Rican, all kinds of political prisoners throughout the late 60s, throughout the 70s, into the 80s and 90s until she passed away. Mutulu Shakur talks about how all political revolutionaries knew her phone number by heart because she would be the first person that they would call when they got arrested, because they knew that she would then be able to call the family, figure out the support committee. So I'm talking about she provided invaluable long-term support. She had detailed logs about every single political prisoner case, when the court date was coming up, the parole date, what people needed to do, and when. She had a notebook and a pen by her phone, and whenever the phone rang, whoever was in the house, their job was to pick up the phone, answer it, and take notes of exactly who called and when, and it was all organized because she was really the communications infrastructure for the movement, and she served as the critical nexus between the above ground and the underground once the repression started to happen, because she was a waitress in Harlem. And so where she worked, people would come there and she would pass messages. And so she was a key nexus for the functioning of the underground and the relationship between the above ground and the underground. I could go on and on and on about Yuri, but she was a revolutionary. I'm honored to have known her. I'm honored to be connected to that family now for 3 generations. So my father and my son just went to this conference, and it was important for me to bring my son so that he could get a sense of his political lineage and his legacy, and to keep that relationship alive. So I'll end there, but yeah, happy birthday, Yuri Kochiyama.
Absolutely, and thank you for that. That's another amazing summary. Appreciate that. Yeah, folks, I agree with those in the chat, encouraging that folks like, share, and subscribe. Do all the things. There's a new store that supports the platform at Black Liberation Media. The link's in the show description, as is now the link to that incredible program that we were just seeing a clip from. So but yeah, let me let you suggest where we should go. Like what you said you had something you wanted to you thought we might want to get to, or
yeah, I mean, so this is her book Heartbeat of Struggle, authored by Diane Fujino. You know, and there's a section here where she just talks about her experience in the OAAU Liberation School. Her first class was on December 5th, 1964 in Suite 128 at the Teresa Hotel in Harlem. As contained in Yuri's detailed class notes on this day, James Shabazz, who functioned as Malcolm's chief assistant at the OAAU, discussed 20th century slaves. He taught many things, how euphemistic language is used to keep people unaware and downtrodden, right? So just think about how often you and I talk about euphemistic language and psychological warfare and the use of language as a weapon, right? Malcolm was ahead of his time. How England initiated the termination of the African trade for economic and not humanitarian reasons, how light-skinned Africans were given preferential treatment over darker Africans in the days of slavery, and today how the Lord-serf relationship has persisted over time in different forms for different economies. So to Hiram's point about the use of Marxist the Marxist understandings that don't necessarily have to be framed as Marxism, right? Thinking about the Lord, thinking about feudalism, thinking about how feudalism remains embedded in the sort of capitalist modern social order. That's all here. And think about the important, we know this because she took detailed notes. And this is really one of Yuri's key contributions, is as an archivist, a librarian, as a documentarian of the movement, that makes it so that the state cannot completely distort our history because we have these records. These ideas probably reinforced material that Yuri had learned in the Harlem Freedom School. In her notes, she recorded an experience from her first class that greatly impressed her. This is a quote from Yuri's notebook. To my surprise, Brother Shabazz started talking about linkages between Africans and Asians. I was the only non-Black there. I don't know if he spoke about this because I was there to help me connect my heritage to what we were learning, or if he would have lectured on this anyway. Brother Shabazz, who speaks some Japanese, Korean, and Chinese, wrote the kanji, the Japanese and Chinese characters for Tao and various martial arts forms on the board. He explained the spirituality underlying these martial arts, that they were exercises to help one move toward God, similar to how Islam did. James Campbell, the main teacher at the Liberation School, remembered seeing Yuri on this day. So this is James Campbell. Well, Campbell just talks about how disciplined Yuri was, that she was the most serious student in the class. She attended Liberation School every Saturday morning until the school closed at the beginning of April 1965. I mean, there's so much. They're reading, she's learning from John Hendrik Clark. In this way, as Campbell explained about the Liberation School, the content of the classes tended toward a Marxist analysis of the country in a popular form that was presented in a fashion that was not burdened with the language of classical Marxism. That's exactly what Hiram just said. So as always, Hiram's on point.
On point, exactly.
Anyway, we could keep going. I mean, I think, but just thinking about the OAAU Liberation School, and her being a student of that school, and she essentially adopts revolutionary Black nationalism, and of course, and he, for Malcolm, Black is an ideological term. By 1964, by 1963, when Malcolm is talking about Blackness, he's talking about ideological and political Blackness as an oppositional force to colonialism, right? That's why in 1963 he says, the Vietnamese Revolution is a Black revolution. He says that in Message to the Grassroots, right? So he's talking about political Blackness, right? Because as we know, he had a sharp critique of bootlicking Negroes, right? So just because you Black don't mean you Black in the way that he's talking about, right? He's talking about revolutionary Blackness, and that's a kind of Blackness that Uri is radicalized by without trying to appropriate it, right? So I'll say that.
I think that's a really good point, and I think this is a great time in the world today to revisit radical forms of solidarity with groups. Folks may or may not be officially categorized within. But yeah, so the other thing I know you wanted that, unless there's something that I wanted to make sure is especially because at your inducement, man, I had to tear apart my basement. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, man. Yo,
I was like, I know I got this book somewhere, and I had to go through some changes.
Yeah,
but I'm very glad that I did. And
you ain't got it like that though.
Oh, hold up. Put that back. Show it again.
Oh, I'm just flexing. I'm just flexing.
Oh no, flex on. Oh wow. No, I don't have it like that. Yeah, wow. Yeah, no, I don't have it like that. No inscription for me. But nonetheless, this book from Jan Carew, Ghosts in Our Blood with Malcolm X in Africa, England, and the Caribbean. I mean, it was great to revisit this as well. So
no doubt. Yo, I gotta do one more Uri thing. And it's for you. Please, it's please. For you. It's for you. Because it involves this. It involves this. And all right. So do me a favor.
Yeah.
You don't have to project it yet, but pull up Take the Land. It's in the thing. Take the Land. Mm-hmm. All right. So all right.
But don't pull it up yet.
Just give me 1 second.
Okay.
Reinvention. Manning Marable says, he's talking about the weeks after the firebombing and the funeral. He's talking about the weeks after Malcolm's funeral, and he's talking about all these loyalists who die. And he says another victim was Robert 35X Smith, one of Malcolm's rostrum guards at the assassination. Karate Bob, as he was called, died when he either jumped or was pushed in front of a speeding subway car. When questioned years later about the death, Larry 4X Prescott curtly explained he got killed in the subway. They claimed we pushed him off the subway platform or something, which I don't believe. So he doesn't give a date to when Robert 35X Smith dies, but we're left to assume that it happened right after Malcolm died. That is not true. That is false. Because Karate Bob was really important to the prison movement in New York. He's really important to Uri. He's the one who pushes Uri. Uri eventually takes her Shahada and she starts to practice Islam. And Karate Bob is the person who does that. And he's actively writing letters and communicating long after Malcolm's death. And Uri's work helps bring that to the fore. So if you could pull up take the land, I think it's called, that newsletter.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and then it's page 9 on the document, but it's actually I think it's page 10. It's either 9 or 10. I can't remember which one it is.
Yeah, this was, let's see, make it a little larger here. There, right here, right?
Did I mess it up? Oh yeah, that's it. Tired of running. Yeah, I mean, so our people should be tired of running. This is Karate Bob. And he's called Karate Bob because he's a martial artist, and he was known for knocking out prison guards and anybody else who messed with him. So, our people should be tired of running, as we have run from Alabama to Chicago, from Mississippi to New York, and from Georgia to sunny California, always running from the oppression of the white man. We run from the Southern sheriff into the bullets of the city cops. We run from the injustice of the men in the white sheets right into the no bail and 50 years of the men in blue robes. We run to the front lines of his war and die. And when it's over, we run to the unemployment lines and remain jobless. Then we run to the welfare line where we starve and are insulted for being poor and black. We run to the church and cry or pray when our sons and brothers are killed by the enemy. We run and carry signs when they put our speakers and comrades in jail. We run for cover as our community is used as an experimental district. New interns experiment on us in the hospitals. New lawyers practice on us in the courtrooms, and all of the subtle killing methods at his disposal are used in the ghettos. I'm tired of running. Now I'm not going to advise you to pick up the gun and fight back or start killing tit for tat. I'm not going to tell you to do what the Tupamaros, those bad Latin brothers, do when their members go to jail. They don't carry signs, they don't march or raise funds, but they liberate those on the inside. Nor am I going to tell you how to stop the dope dealers, the white tricks and other exploiters from coming in your community with their filth. Brothers and sisters, no one will have to tell you what to do, when to do it, why you are doing it, or who to do it to when you get tired of running. So that was Malcolm X's comrade. And there's a
Now listen.
Yep. And so again, yeah. And there's a summary of his life there. And so he's imprisoned in I think it's 67.
67 it says here,
for
yeah.
allegedly shooting at and killing or wounding, I can't remember, some cops in the subway.
Yeah, it just says here that 3 policemen were found shot in Brooklyn. It doesn't seem to give the
well, that's
status.
Well, that's strategic, right? But so I knew you would appreciate that, just a demonstrably false error, a demonstrable error in that text. But also from that we learn again about the relationships and the people who are carrying on his legacy, often in anonymity. So I talked to a number of people in Tip of the Spear who were politicized by Karate Bob, right? And Yuri and him were in relationship, and it's because of her archival labor that we are able to keep track and follow people like Karate Bob, even after the state attempts to disappear them.
Wow. Yeah, no, definitely thank you for that. That is, that's amazing. Folks, please do again. We can get to that. Like, share, subscribe, support the platform. And unfortunately, we're gonna have to. I do have a definitive out at 10, but technically, given this is the birthday of all these wonderful people, we're doing the celebration, but obviously none of this has to stop. So I just have to even just remind myself, because I feel like, it's coming to an end. This is not like some Netflix series. It's not over.
No, we must not stop. We must not stop.
Exactly. Right. So yeah. How do you want to?
Jan Carew is a Guyanese intellectual, a poet, author, statesman. He was an advisor to Kwame Nkrumah. Kwame Nkrumah's government in Ghana. He's got a 2-part biography. I mean, he was one of these people who was everywhere writing, documenting. He was also married to Sylvia Wynter for a time.
That's right.
I know. It's wild.
Wow.
It's wild. It's wild. My parents live in Louisville, Kentucky. He moved to Louisville. He passed away. He moved to Louisville. So him and my parents became tight. So whenever I would visit them, I would have the opportunity to spend time with him and listen to his stories. And my daughter and his daughter, me and his daughter went to college together. So we know each other from those circles. But I didn't have a sense of how amazing he was. But so he was based in London when Malcolm passed through in between his 2 trips to Africa, and got the opportunity to interview Malcolm over several days. And then years later, this is 1993, I think, years later. So that was in 65, I think. I think he interviewed him months before he was killed. I think this is what we get here is really the most up-to-date Malcolm in terms of his political thinking, right? This is and so there's not a ton of material he had to work with, and so but what we get here is a really rich conversation between 2 intellectuals, and it's clear that Malcolm is learning from Jan as much as Jan is learning from Malcolm. Jan being an intellectual who was groomed in the sort of upper echelons of elite, educational systems. So it's really important. It's a really important book. And then all the stuff about, there's a big emphasis on Malcolm's mother here, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
So this is key for that as well. We learn a lot about his mom, his mother's radicalism, his relationship with his mother, and all of that. So it's really important.
And I thought, I didn't remember her. I didn't know anything. But I didn't remember this part either till reviewing it for today. But Caru's crediting to Tanta Bess, who I'm not familiar with, in terms of a woman keeping the legacies alive, and who knew, because she grew up with Malcolm's mother, if I remember correctly, right? So and was encouraging that folks not forget Louise Little's contribution here. But I know you have some noted points that you wanted to bring up. Was there anything we can go through them? Was there one or more in particular that you wanted to focus on?
I mean, so to Hiram's point, so on page 24, I mean, they're just little notes. They're just little quotes, just little things. And then it's like, right. So like on page 24, I talked about political blackness. He says this on page 24. Here's a quote from Malcolm in this conversation. He says, okay, you've made your point, but because they're talking about the black-white binary. Malcolm says, okay, you made your point, but right now I see black and white as political and ideological terms. I probably have just as much mixed blood as you do, but politically and ideologically, we're both black. Blackness is a political position for Malcolm by 1965. Right.
And can I just add on, because he says the next thing he says we're both politically and ideologically we're both black. He says we've got to be. He puts like an imperative on it, like you can't. And that really spoke to me, especially with all this. What I feel is this increase towards specifically around multiracialism, and people should identify that way, and we should start embracing that category. I'm like, no. And this is not again about denial or whatever. It's about it's a recognition of the political situation, man. It's like we've got to be clear. That's why it's like that. That was beautiful. That was
100%. 100%.
Got to be clear.
Then on page 25, Jan is bringing up the role of women in struggle. And Malcolm says the following, another quote. And as for women resisting, I'm just beginning to explore that hidden subject, and I've still got a long way to go. But beginning with those early memories of my mother, I've started to dig deeper. And what I'm finding out is changing the way I see the world, right? So he's in a process of transformation. And this speaks to the humility that Hiram was emphasizing. How many revolutionaries do you know who are so open about what they don't know, what they need to learn, and who they are learning from, and the impact that others have had on their thought, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, no,
On page 34, there's this really interesting conversation about Marxism and interracial relationships, right? At the time, Jan was married to a white woman, and he was helping to raise their 2 white children, and then they had her 2 children from a previous marriage, and then the 2 of them had a child. And so, you know, Jan asks Malcolm, "Are you a Marxist?" No. Malcolm asks Jan, "Are you a Marxist?" And then Jan says, "Aren't you?" And then they engage in the following conversation, and it comes back to should I read the whole thing, Jared?
I love it. Yeah.
Okay,
I think so. Yeah.
It comes back to the question of Marx, but it goes left in an interesting way for a minute. So he says, "Aren't you?" to Malcolm. And then Malcolm says, "Answer my question and I'll answer yours." And then Carew says, "I'll answer by telling you a story. Recently, a countryman of mine, a black vicar of Bray," I don't know what that means, "who looks like a weasel and acts like one, went to an English lord and told him that I was a communist. And the English aristocrat laughed in his face. Which self-respecting black man wouldn't be a communist? That lord himself told me about it. There are some white people who like to tell you with malice about the quislings who come to lick their boots." Then Malcolm says, "You still haven't answered my question." Jan says, "I'm a socialist, a pan-Africanist, a black Marxist, a nationalist who believes in the cultural unity of the black world based on our common resistance to white racism. And I'm an off-again, on-again atheist because the secret and forbidden spirit world to which the polyglot races and cultures in my village introduced me still lives in my imagination and my psyche and nourishes me when I write or paint. I'm all of these things rolled into one." "You left out something," Marx said, cutting in again. "What's that?" "That you're married to an English woman and that you have 3 English stepchildren. And one of my own," I added. "And one of your own," Malcolm repeated. "But this married to a white woman business is peculiarly American obsession." "American and South African," Malcolm corrected. "But I found out during my travels that it wasn't such a big deal to most folks." So they keep going for a while. And then he says he brought the conversation back to the subject of where he stood on questions of socialism and Marxism. "I told you about my potpourri of socialism, Marxism, etc. So what about you, Malcolm?" And here's where this is what Malcolm says. "I'm a Muslim and a revolutionary, and I'm learning more and more about political theories as the months go by. The only Marxist group in America that offered me a platform was the Socialist Workers' Party. I respect them and they respect me. The communists have nixed me, gone out of the way to attack me, that is, with the exception of the Cuban communists. If a mixture of nationalism and Marxism makes the Cubans fight the way they do and makes the Vietnamese stand up so resolutely to the might of America and its European and other lapdogs, then there must be something to it. But my organization of Afro-American unity based in Harlem is based in Harlem, and we've got to learn to creep before we walk and walk before we run." He paused and added, "But the chances are that they will get me the way they got Lumumba before he reached the running stage."
Man. As you pointed out, this is as far as we have access to, one of the more up-to-date, the most up-to-date thinking of Malcolm before he was assassinated. And there's a certain level of clarity there.
And he's sick throughout the interview. He's not feeling well.
Right.
Partly because he was just poisoned in Egypt. So there
That's
had
right.
already been an assassination attempt. And so Jan is trying to give him tea, give him food, and Malcolm takes it and just puts it to the side because he was just poisoned. And so this idea that he's about to be assassinated is a constant part of the conversation. He says, "I'm a marked man," he explains somberly. "They've marked me down for death. I'm living like a man who's already dead." This is what Malcolm says on page 38. And then they say some more, and who's they? They hounding you down? This is what Carew asks. And then Malcolm says, "I used to think it was the Muslims, but more and more is dawning on me that the forces tracking me down are more powerful than Elijah's hitmen. After what happened in Egypt and France, I quit saying it was the Muslims alone who were after me."
Damn.
And then Malcolm says, "You don't know the people who are after me. I know them, and I know the people who are manipulating them. Nothing short of my death will satisfy that combination. Did you read about how I was nearly poisoned in Cairo?" You know, he talks about that. And then there's a really interesting thing because Jan is trying to convince Malcolm to go and live in exile. Let's see. Oh,
which is something. Yeah. And I just want to say that was something that he was that he talked about in his diaries, I believe, where he was to the extent he was saying he couldn't not stay immediately here in the US with that wing of the fight. But yeah, sorry, go ahead. Yeah.
No, not at all. I mean, he says, you know, "Malcolm, why don't you go back to one of these friendly countries you just visited until things cool down a bit?" You know, and he says, "You sound like my brother. Well, why don't you? I could never do that. Look, Jan, if I go into exile, it would turn out to be a case of out of sight, out of mind." And Jan says, "Look, you can write from there. You can do other things from there." And he said, "It won't make any difference." You know, because he's convinced that they're going to kill him. Jan says to himself, he's choosing martyrdom, but there must be other honorable choices. He shouldn't be left to make this choice alone. When will people learn how to keep irreplaceable leaders alive? Why must millions of us remain impotent onlookers while others decide whether our leaders should live or die?
How long shall they kill our prophets while we stand aside and look?
Then on page 82, he says, "But I've already made up my mind. You see, you have the option of staying here and spinning out theories. I can't stay. I can't say in all honesty that I don't envy you," he says to Carew. "Those 4.5 days at Oxford," he did a debate at Oxford with some of the best debaters in the world and just cooked them. And everyone lavished praise on him. And he still, and this is what he had to say, you know, "Those 4.5 days in Oxford were more stimulating intellectually than anything I had experienced on the street or in my locked away, mind blinkered Black Muslim period. But it was the sum total of all my experiences, good and bad, that made the Oxford one so stimulating. If I had stayed there too long, I'd just dry up and wither away. So I've got to go back to a brutal, racist country where our folks have to learn how to organize for self-defense. The theory has to be part of that struggle, or else it would be like a froth that disappears before you can taste it. I know that you mean well with all this talk about ancestors and roots. And what did you call it? Hamletism? You're telling me in so many words that I shouldn't go back right now, but I've made up my mind and I'm going back." I mean, there's more, you know, there's so much more.
Yeah, I mean, but yeah, it's wild to yeah, it's just sometimes I just get stuck sometimes trying to, you know, think about what is making him make these decisions, what is pulling him in one direction versus another. And then the clarity around the impending doom, and then the hopelessness that Carew expresses in his inability to save the guy. You know, it's like I'm making some effort at least to save him or to offer him an out. And I can't get it, you know, so that's yeah.
Here's what he says about the strategy of state repression, which I think is a organic theorization of how counterinsurgency works. He says, he starts this at the bottom of page 52.
That's right. That's right.
This is
That's
Malcolm.
right.
He says, Malcolm came out of his long reverie to declare, this is a quote, "It's as if we're on a perpetual journey on a slave ship, and when the slaves get noisy and violent and threaten to tear the whole ship apart, the white captain sends a delegation down to negotiate with the so-called ringleaders. The guys they send down have been dealing with Negroes for a long time, and they know how to size them up. So, as they talk to them, they make mental notes and separate the few who can't be bought or broken from the ones who can be. And they open the hatch, invite them all to come on deck, where there's air to breathe and sunlight to warm them. Once they're on deck, the hatch is battered down again. The ones who can't be bought or broken are quietly taken aside and thrown to the sharks. The others know what's going on, but they pretend it's not happening because they're in cahoots with the whites who are getting rid of the troublesome black leaders. So those chosen ones are fed well, and then they're dressed up and encouraged to strut around like roosters. When the folks down below become impatient and begin to create a racket, those bought and paid for misleaders open the hatch a little and shout down to them, 'Brothers and sisters, be patient. Here we are negotiating with these white folk. Why are you making things difficult for us by acting so uncivilized?' Then they go back to living high on the hog until the next blow up threatens. And when those misleaders can't keep the rebellious brothers and sisters quiet any longer, the whites get rid of them, and another delegation goes below deck and brings up a new batch."
Woo! So he was even
making
on
it plain, making it
plain, and he was even on to the liberal counterinsurgency ahead of his time.
100%.
So, listen, with your permission, I'm gonna invite any concluding thoughts from you, because I want to take literally less than 5 minutes to do something very petty that I don't want you to be involved with. So I want to leave just a couple of minutes for that. But I really thank you very much for not only participating, but sending these gems along the way, and then helping fill in a lot of the historical gaps that we've been covering. But yeah, anything else we want to get to before?
Well, one thing I want to invite you to, maybe this is the pettiness, but I want to invite you to engage with the Black capitalism critique on page 105. So
that's
I just
right.
Invite you to do that. I don't have to be here for that. You can
no
on that by yourself.
But at least bring it up.
Okay, all right.
Yeah.
So it's on page 105. This is Jan Carew talking in conversation with Malcolm.
Right.
He's talking about his transformation, he's talking about his transformation. And then Jan says, the theory that Black people should own the small businesses in their neighborhoods was central to the economic philosophy of Black nationalism. It is, of course, a perfectly valid theory, but the theory caged itself in ghettos and suggested that in a capitalist system, one could have capitalist communes that could exist largely unto themselves. It became more theology and wish fulfillment than economic fact. Malcolm had pointed out that when the people of the inner cities could not have face-to-face confrontations with absentee owners of businesses in their neighborhoods, they would attack their property instead. That when those folks were accused of rioting and destroying their own neighborhoods, this was false, since the majority were tenants and itinerants in the inner cities who owned little besides the clothes on their back. And it keeps going, right? But I mean, he's pointing out the fallacy of Black capitalism as a liberatory strategy for many of the same reasons that you do.
Yeah, no, I mean, again, all of these arguments, again, like Daruba says, we've already won these arguments. Like the arguments that I'm making are again the intellectual children to all of these arguments here that have already been made. And he's pointing to the fact, even in the preceding sentence to where you started, he's pointing out that Malcolm had made what he would call an advance from the millenarian movement into a nationwide one that was we're talking about Elijah Muhammad, the limitations of Elijah Muhammad's worldview around business. That was alarming. The white power structure were no longer valid. That these ideas around the bold statements indicated that he was in the midst of formulating new political, social, religious, and economic theories. The ones that had served him well were no longer valid. Was the point that he was making. So that Malcolm was changing and evolving with what he saw was happening and what was necessary by any means, of course.
Let me say one more point to tee up whatever.
Go ahead, please.
Whatever,
yeah, please.
Because this is important. You know, this idea of the Malcolm as a communicative genius, as a genius of media, dealing with the media, right? So Jan Carew was at Malcolm's Oxford debate, and this is what he was spellbound by it. And Jan is a speaker, right? So he was spellbound by it. And here's what he says about, because I think he sets the context. Okay, good. Listen to what he says about Malcolm using coded messages, talking to multiple audiences simultaneously, right? So he's at Oxford. So he's obviously talking to these white Oxford intellectuals. But Jan says the following: the opening themes he touched on in his talk at the London School of, this is LSE, the London School of Economics, were loaded with coded messages to his grassroots constituents in America's inner cities. So he's addressing LSE debaters, but he's also sending coded messages to his people back in the US. The media had noised it everywhere that he had changed, that after his pilgrimage to Mecca, he no longer denounced whites as devils, that he had abandoned Elijah Muhammad's Manichaean doctrines. The underlying suggestion in these rumors was that somehow he had sold out and betrayed his gullible followers. The grassroots folks were accustomed to hot gospelers of the Black Revolution assailing the citadels of white male power with incendiary words, and then in a thrice being co-opted, neutralized, silenced, or killed. But they trusted Malcolm above all others. So speaking to that sophisticated audience at the LSC, he was also sending messages to calm the fears and apprehensions of his inner city devotees. He knew that they knew that the media would automatically misconstrue his words, quote him out of context, and attribute the basest motives to his deeds, but they were skilled at reading between the lines, ignoring the sly racist innuendos, and drawing their own conclusions. So he goes into more detail about what those coded messages are and how it worked. But, again, thinking about not just Malcolm's brilliance, but the brilliance of everyday people who are able to read between the lines, using popular media as a way to convey hidden underground messages, talking to multiple audiences simultaneously. Like, this is something we need to think more about as a methodology, as a communicative methodology. So I just wanted to point that out, and shout out to Jan Carew for recognizing that, right, and naming it and bringing it to the surface.
And salute to you for bringing this back as a suggested piece for us to consider. And I'm going to joke with you off the air about what I think you just did there. That was also pretty slick. But salute to you. Listen, Dr. Burton, man, seriously, man, thank you very much for obviously all your work, but for coming through this morning and doing what you do. And
right on. Thank you so much.
I look forward to the next time. No, honor is mine. Thank you very much. Peace. Listen, everybody. I had to ask him to step off the camera because I don't want to sully anything that has just been done by having him be falsely associated with what I'm about to share with you. But just very quickly, first of all, thanks to Dr. Burton and to Hiram Rivera, not only for inspiring this series, but for coming through here at its conclusion, so to speak. But over the last couple of weeks, I mentioned we've had cause to evoke the name or some of the contributions to this book here, which is called By Any Means Necessary, Malcolm X Real, Not Reinvented, Critical Conversations on Manning Marable's Biography of Malcolm X, edited by Herb Boyd, Rod Daniels, Malana Karenga, and Hakeem Madabudi, which admittedly, in a sort of a comradely way, I always saw as this sort of competition to our collection of critical essays on the same book, Alive, Reinvention, Correcting Manning Marable's Malcolm X. And there are essays in here, and I was reminded of that because there are some essays in here that we in ours would have just never accepted. And one of the reasons was that we were at least attempting to stay focused on the scholarship included in Marable's book, not get caught up in sensationalism or not get distracted by even some of our own biases to the extent that that was possible. And I mentioned two of the contributors to this book over the course of the series, and I went back and revisited their essays, and this is exactly one of and it reminded me exactly why I wanted to do this series and was honored to participate in it, and have always wanted to be involved in the argument around the popular discussion and memory of Malcolm X. The two contributors in question are Bill Fletcher and Peniel Joseph, and I just want to give you very quick examples of what I'm talking about. The first one here, from Bill Fletcher's contribution, and if you go back and you remember, we played some of the debate he had with Amiri Baraka around Malcolm's memory and Marable's writing. And if you remember, I pointed out that and it was brought up in that debate that Bill Fletcher would create these straw arguments, that he could post so that they could defend Marable's book without engaging the more substantive criticism that I think I and others were trying to bring up about that were often excluding the politics that we were commemorating so much today and throughout this series. And if you go to page 125 of this book during Bill Fletcher's essay, you see sort of what I'm talking about. He did the same thing in print here. At the top of the page, he says, quote, "I had the opportunity to speak with a Black journalist about the book," meaning Marable's book. "He indicated that he did not care for the book. When I probed, it turned out that his major concern was that he did not believe that Marable should have offered any tentative conclusions about matters where he failed to have complete facts. One example of this was the matter of the same-sex encounter for pay in the Malcolm Little period, and the second example was the possible affairs that Betty Shabazz may have had," end quote. Now, again, he doesn't mention whoever this said Black journalist is or was, if in fact this Black journalist existed, and it doesn't allow for any meaningful investigation to whatever the argument was. What I do remember, and I'm not saying he was talking about me, but what I do remember is that I was highly involved with reaching out to Bill during this time and trying to tell him specifically in emails and other conversation, I'm not interested in this sensationalism stuff. I have very specific criticisms about the scholarship and the framing and the politics of the book. And Bill Fletcher would never engage other than to do this kind of straw manning of an argument in the emails. And then again, so he does it right here so that he can set up a conversation about the salacious claims and never engage the actual ideological and political arguments that Baraka was trying to call him out for, and that I was trying to call the book out for. So I just wanted to quickly point that out. And the other one, in his essay, it's literally titled "Rescuing Malcolm X from His Calculated Myths," is the title of Peniel Joseph's contribution to this book. And remember, Peniel Joseph, again, who continues to have a lot of influence over popular scholarship around Malcolm X, documentaries, Netflix series. He's touted by legendary scholars as the premier interpreter of Black Power. I mean, he's so it's no small thing for him to say that he's rescuing, that he and Marable are rescuing Malcolm in the way that he claimed to later have rescued Kwame Ture from obscurity in his book, Stokely. But look at the very way he opens up his chapter. Quote, "Malcolm X bestrides the post-war age of decolonization alongside global icons like Martin Luther King Jr. and Mahatma Gandhi. If King and Gandhi evoked nonviolence and disciplined civil disobedience as a shield to protect the world from imperial wars, racism, and rampant materialism, Malcolm wielded the specter of self-defense, violence, and revolution as a sword to permanently alter relations between the global South and North." Then he goes on to talk more about needing to, as Marable did, achieves the rare feat of rescuing the man from his own mythology with deep archival research and brilliant insight. Nowhere in the 10 pages of Peniel's essay does he say anything about the politics that we talked about just this morning, never mind over the last 12 or 13 weeks of this series and throughout this platform on a routine daily basis. And he sets it up with the artificial framing, as is popularly done, that King and Gandhi are sort of equals in their liberal nonviolence and civil disobedience, while Malcolm was something very different. So not only does Peniel quickly frame Malcolm in a way that allows him, that is Joseph, to avoid engaging the ideas and the politics and the depth, but he falsely frames King as in that same kind of frozen false juxtaposition against Malcolm, so that they can return. And then he claims that he and Marable are rescuing Malcolm from his own mythology, as opposed to the mythology that Joseph, Marable, and others continue to impose on Malcolm, to all of our detriment. So I just quickly wanted to do that. And I thought it was a good way in some ways to end this discussion and today's show, as a reminder of why I'm so grateful to Hiram for coming up with the idea, for Dr. Burton and others for, contributing off air and then on air to the conversation, to all of you for joining us for this series. We will continue it in many other ways, obviously, and through any other programs of my own and on this platform. So it's not really an end, but just sort of an unofficial conclusion as we celebrate Malcolm, Uri, Lorraine, Ho, and all revolutionaries. This has been great. I cannot honestly think of a better way to spend my time than building on these ideas with folks like we had on here today and those in the chat. So it's been a complete honor. I look forward to, obviously, we're not going anywhere, continuing the thing. We'll be back at 12 noon with Kahindi Andrews talking about his documentary, in fact. So don't go too far from the platform. And of course, the remix and all the other great programs on the show, on this platform, continuing all week long. So big thanks, everybody. I literally, this is the best. This is really the only real reason to do any of this YouTube stuff, is for these kinds of programs and days and mornings. So salute everybody. Big thanks. Peace only if you're willing to fight for it, as Fred Hampton used to say, and damn it, by any means necessary. Let's go, and I'll catch you next time right here at...
And what do you sacrifice? Calm, kindness, kinship, love. I've given up all chance at inner peace. I made my mind a sunless space. I share my dreams with ghosts. I wake up every day to an equation I wrote 15 years ago, for which there's only one conclusion. I'm damned for what I do. My anger, my ego, my unwillingness to yield, my eagerness to fight, that set me on a path from which there's no escape. I yearn to be a savior against injustice without contemplating the cost, and by the time I look down, there's no longer any ground beneath my feet. What is my sacrifice? Condemned to use the tools of my enemy to defeat them. I burn my decency for someone else's future. I burn my life to make a sunrise that I know I'll never see. Now, the ego that started this fight will never have a mirror or an audience or the light of gratitude. So what do I sacrifice? Everything, 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 everything.
I mix what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like.